Welcome to the Low Carb MD Podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope. Nothing said on the Low Carb MD Podcast is medical advice. Please consult your own doctor before making any lifestyle changes.
Hello and welcome back to the Low Carb MD Podcast. Tro is delinquent somehow. He's running. He's going to join us hopefully midstream. Hopefully in the next couple of minutes. He's probably got patient stuff going on. But we have a great guest today. I actually got to interview him on Life's Best Medicine, and he's not afraid to do good journalism, jump into the fray, and kind of go against political correctness and kind of tell the truth. And his book, I read it, and he's gave me an advanced copy. It was really great. Tristan Justice, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us about you first. What's your background? How did you get into this area?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've been a political reporter at the Federalist now for 5 years, ever since college. And I kind of came up with this book project idea about 2.5 years ago, right after the lockdowns with COVID. And so I started really covering, the Federalist, they've been really flexible, letting us kind of cover different areas of interest beyond our regular day-to-day assignments. And so I kind of developed this beat in obesity and mental health. And after covering that issue for 3 years, you can imagine what that beat looked like 4 years ago when COVID hit. This book kind of came to fruition because I was kind of looking at all these influencers online promoting body positivity, and they all happen to be funded by the food and pharmaceutical industries. And so I'm 23 under lockdown, frustrated that the country is closing my gym and telling me to stay isolated and binge on whatever I can find at the grocery store. And I found the same people promoting that message were the very same people promoting these ideas that, being obese is healthy and nothing to worry about. And so I ended up just moving up to a mountain for 1.5 years and read every book I could get my hands on. And then this was the end product.
And what was your motivation? What were you seeing? Were you just saying that this is a dangerous messaging, or that you knew enough nutrition to say, wait a minute, I think we're on the wrong track here?
Well, I don't think you can ever know enough about nutrition. That's kind of the one big takeaway is I learned from this whole experience. But one of the motivations was really just a frustration being 23 and under lockdown. I think a lot of people can probably relate to that, just being living under this umbrella of forced isolation, and the same people prescribing this endless lockdown that you have to take a vaccine to get out of are happen to be profiting off these lockdowns. The snack industry made an extra $10 billion in profits over 2 years between 2020 and 2022. Pharmaceutical industry made $100 billion off these vaccines. And now they're bankrolling these people, these influencers, promoting all these ideas about obesity and weight. And I was just getting frustrated by this kind of apathy towards personal health around me. It seemed like everyone claimed to be so worried and concerned about their health, but no one wanted to take care of their own health. And so I started looking into the people who are promoting these messages. And of course, it was all corporate sponsored.
So that's amazing. A lot of these influencers were corporate sponsors. So, and I've seen stuff, and I actually called it out early because I'm like, this doesn't make sense, where Jason Fung, who's one of the guys in metabolic health, and talk about fasting, where like 5 or 6 guys attack him at the same time, saying this guy's a quack, he's crazy, and all this stuff. I'm like, he's helping millions of people around the world. How can they possibly have this? And they were all social influencers. Now it turns out all these guys are promoting these new drugs, the GLP-1 drugs now, and they're promoting all these things like, oh, so that's why you were attacking. Maybe you had a vested interest. It wasn't just, because if you have a problem with someone, maybe you could reach out behind the scenes and not do it professionally and say, hey, I'm concerned about this statement. But they were taking a lot of his stuff out of context, and turns out, oh, maybe you're getting funded not directly by big pharma, but by the PR firms who they're paying.
Well, I found myself just really frustrated about all my neighbors' apathy towards personal health. Again, it was kind of one of those things where we knew really early on how obesity was like the primary comorbidity to serious outcomes with COVID. But the message was not, okay, let's optimize our lifestyles to restore metabolic health, it was, okay, everybody go home and isolate for your neighbor to keep everybody else safe. It was just, I'm looking around, is anybody taking care of their own health? I mean, but also as I was kind of going down through this research, I realized no one knew how to take care of themselves. No one knew what a proper diet included. No one knew how much exercise they should be doing, what they should be doing to exercise. And it's that lack of education that was kind of a twin pillar of all this. And the food and pharmaceutical industries were they make so much money on muddying the waters on how to live a quote unquote healthy lifestyle, that, half of this book is just about how uneducated we are. And as I was doing the research, I was going through and reading all these different books from these different influencers promoting body positivity. And I actually don't doubt that a lot of them were doing the things that they said they were doing in their books. They talk about starving themselves. They talk about going on these calorie deficits. They talk about going on all these different diets they find on the internet, some really bizarre stuff that's out there that people probably come across. The cabbage diet, the pomegranate diet,
grapefruit diet, grapefruit and coffee diet, all these things that we've done over the years for sure.
Right. And then as I was reading these other books on kind of doing these deep dives on how the name of the game is blood sugar and how the name of the game is controlling, insulin, maintaining, proper insulin function. I really don't doubt that these people were really struggling to lose weight because everything they were doing wrong that they were told to do to lose weight was wrong. I mean, when you starve yourself, your metabolism goes haywire. When you go on, and I don't think calories really tell us a whole lot. And so I think people get understandably frustrated when they do all the different things that they've been told for like 70 years now to lose weight, and they don't lose weight. And then body positivity is the end result of that.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing because, I think, and I love you to just address this because I know people are going to say, okay, you're fat shaming. So fat shaming became a thing where you're not allowed to say anything about someone's, habit to say, hey, maybe your knees are hurting, your back hurting because of this, or your sugars are really high. And it's not the point of shaming someone into doing better, but like, hey, I'm concerned about your health. Like when we saw Eli Giroux, he's a doc he's a hospitalist, and he made this statement online. He said, I'm seeing who's dying, and this is who's dying: the morbidly obese, diabetic, metabolically sick people. He goes, that's what I'm seeing. And he got attacked and said, you're a vicious person and you're terrible. And so, having your message saying, okay, how do we balance this of not saying fat shaming and not glorifying obesity too, right? I mean, how do we as a society do better on this?
Right. And I'm not really sure that the movement we're seeing today is as much an episode of negligence when it comes to personal hygiene, as much it is a manifestation of frustration of being told to do something for 70 years that we know was never going to work. We were told for 70 years not to eat fat. The low-fat diet craze has been, of course, demonstrably catastrophic for public health. We were told to eat, maintain this calories in, calories out model. Well, that was broken. But of course, all these different issues, the idea that you can just run off the soda is, that's a narrative from the food industry. You have Coca-Cola with the resources of a mid-sized republic. About the resources of about the size of Peru, funding the Energy Balance Network to promote this idea that you can eat and drink whatever you want as long as you're moving enough. These are really easy messages to buy into. But at the end of the day, they just didn't work. And so you have a lot of these influencers now capitalizing on the frustration of their followers, having pursued all these different remedies that they were told to do to take care of their health, only to become sicker and sicker in the process. And with each generation, this being a doctor, when your parents behave a certain way, it carries down with each generation. And, I think when you dig yourself into a 10-foot hole, you think you can still climb your way out, but when you get down 100 feet, you start to kind of give up hope and kind of embrace this sort of apathy with where you are. And I think that's kind of where we've come ever since the low-fat diet became, the nation's latest diet trend in the 1960s.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone right now who's listening? They're 350 pounds, right? They're trying to get their life. They're like, how do I get a better life? And what would you say to that person? Like, who do you say to follow or what to listen to in order to have a better life? Or do you say, hey, your life's great. You love you just the way you are and stay where you're at?
Well, I'd say buy the book.
Yeah.
I mean, we laid out everything we learned in part two. The whole first part is about the movement, how the food and pharmaceutical industries have engineered a sick care system, not a healthcare system. But the entire second half of the book is 5 chapters, one chapter on each kind of pillar of health. You have how to eat, exercise, sleep, live in community. Of course, the last chapter, my favorite chapter, was positive prayer, and that is how spirituality is so important for our health and frankly sanity. And so I really do think that our diet is probably 90% of the problem. And I think people get tricked into buying certain things at the grocery stores, thinking that they're healthy and they're not. And one thing that we can probably get into here in a little bit is I get worried about the Make America Healthy Again movement being kind of this selling this false sense of hope. Making Fruit Loops healthier is not necessarily making Fruit Loops healthy, but I think the name of the game really is reducing carbohydrate intake, managing insulin levels, and recalibrating how your body uses fuel. But also two of the other obvious ones: exercise, sleep, and of course community. But what I found after doing all this research for the book was obesity is a multifactorial neuroendocrine disorder. But every one of these different issues I was reading about that contributes to obesity, like poor sleep and proper exercise, it all goes back to insulin, and it all goes back to how sensitive our bodies are to insulin. And that's why I think, a ketogenic diet is, based on my research, probably the best way to go if your goal is to lose weight.
And to be healthy, right? And because we're seeing it now from a mental health standpoint, which is shocking, right? When Tro and I talked about this years ago, I got reamed by doctors saying, "How dare you say this? You should have your medical license taken to say food has anything to do with mood." It's like, well, hop your kids up on soda and keep them up all night and not let them sleep and see how they are. See if you're gonna have fun kids to be around, or how many people say I need a drink to calm my nerves, I need a cup of coffee to get going in the morning. There's so much that these does have an influence on our. You eat a ton of jalapenos or ghost peppers, that's going to put you in a bad mood the next day when you're trying to go to the bathroom, right? So, I mean, there's so much to it that we've just turned an eye to, there's like you've alluded to some things I really like, and obviously I also want to step into the spiritual aspect of that because I started another podcast called Life's Best Medicine because, okay, if we're trying to be metabolically healthy, but you're spiritually in a bad place and you're stressed out and you're fighting with everyone and you're bitter, like that has an effect on your metabolic health and how your body is going to respond. So I think positivity, enjoying life, and I think part of it is, okay, not all of us are perfect, not all of us can be fit and healthy, and you go, okay, what can I do to be better, to move forward? And a lot of people rely on faith. And it could be a lot of people because they're missing something either spiritually, emotionally, that they turn to food as their comfort or their peace or their happiness.
And that's such a more optimistic message, right? That you can be better, you can do better. This whole idea of, okay, you're fine the way you are. Sometimes we're not. I just published a book on health, and there's probably 20 different things I could do every day that could be healthier. And I think that's such a more optimistic message to tell someone, no, you could be doing better. It's something I started, not to be cliche here, but I started my year living on top of a mountain by reading both books by Jordan Peterson, All 24 Rules for Life. And he talks about how, you don't want to sacrifice who you could be for who you are. And I think that's such a compelling message to tell someone, especially when they're trying to lose weight and improve their health.
I think that's so important because I'm telling you, I talk to people all the time, and so many people that bought into the body positivity. Like, they had I forget what it was in San Francisco. They had like an obese conference, right? Where everyone was there, like glorified, like, oh, if I could gain more weight like you. And then once they started having diabetes and health problems and their knees hurt and they're depressed and they feel miserable, they have no energy, all these things that we see with that are very common with obesity. Now they go, oh my gosh, now I gained 80 extra pounds because I was into this movement. And just saying, like you'll see it on TikTok or social media where people just glorify eating trash food forever.
Yeah.
And the other issue is, and I think this is important to talk about, is like we have a responsibility to each other too. Mm-hmm. So if all of us are sick, then the healthcare system crumbles because we're crumbling under the weight of our own disease and obesity. And diabetes is the number one cause of all these things.
I think we just have a moral responsibility to ourselves and our loved ones to want to be the best versions of who we are. And we're probably going to get some flack against this book that, oh, we just want to fat shame people and we want to fat shame celebrities, influencers. You mentioned the fat conference. I talk about FatCon Philly, which I wanted to go cover in person, but they actually blocked me on Instagram when I was going through their stuff. And so I write at length about this FatCon convention in Philadelphia. Of course, none of the speakers there were doctors. I mean, it was all this conference promoting social justice, and the pro-fat movement has kind of become another wing of the social justice movement, placing obesity on the victim hierarchy of social justice and kind of creating it as like another marginalized group that warrants different special privileges. And that's just one very small aspect of this entire thing. But in terms of fat shame, I mean, look, I opened the book. It's not the most comfortable thing to write about, but I just felt like you have to put something like this out there if you're going to write on such a sensitive topic, right? So I'm gay and my co-author is a woman. This is not a book written to just fat shame a bunch of people. We introduced the book by talking about body image ourselves. Now we've grappled with body image in this kind of digital era. I'm 27 and she's in her early 30s. And we're both kind of grown up in this environment where body standards are a sensitive subject. And so, the idea that we would want to fat shame anybody is really just going to come out of this playbook of I think it's just going to be one of those reflexive accusations like sexism, homophobia, and whatever else usually gets thrown out there.
No, racist, right? I mean, just to discredit you. And then, like you're saying, look, you've dealt with discrimination, you've dealt with having to go through, difficulties in life and all these things. And no one wants to bring shame and abuse on people or make them feel miserable, because that's not going to accomplish anything. Because really, honestly, like very few people benefit from fat shaming. Very few people say you're a slob, you're lazy, you're stupid, and believe me, they're playing this in their head because they heard that when they were a little kid. And a lot of us did, who struggled with weight. Tro, being, he was like 350 pounds and lost weight and had to come to terms with life and what matters. And there's so much to this. And and unfortunately, a lot of people don't know, like they don't know how to deal with their friend who's gained 80 pounds. Like, how do you approach that person? How do you talk to them? How do you say, hey, maybe encouraging, let's go for a walk together. Let's start doing active stuff. Instead of going to dinner, why don't we do something else, like more constructive, or let's do Tai Chi together, or yoga, or Zumba or something. But
big yoga fan.
Yeah, and the other thing is like and again, you were kind of a victim of the lockdowns, being in your 20s and healthy and metabolically healthy. Like, you weren't going to die of COVID, right? But you're locked down and your whole life gets shut up. So I could see how you get frustrated and want to research this stuff. But really what we had to do is protect the vulnerable, the old, the morbidly obese, the diabetics. And that's the reality. But everyone else got locked down as a result of that. And I think that too, and taking into account personal responsibility, right? That's one of the things in society we kind of forgot. We go, oh, it's just genetic. You're just going to be like that. There's nothing you can do. And even the ADA for years, just recently, they said that diabetes is a chronic progressive disease, right? Irreversible. It's like BS. We reverse it all the time, right? They go, oh, it's just in remission. Okay. They're not diabetic and they're not going to get the complications, right? Whatever you want to call it.
Right. And on that note, I mean, where is the Diabetes Association on all of this stuff? I mean, it's been one of the most frustrating things to watch. But you mentioned shame. There's different kinds of shame out there. And when leveraged properly, shame is really fundamental to conquering any one of our problems, right? So shame is actually embraced in different addictions groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, different support groups that come together that want to solve a common problem. Shame is fundamental to their different programs. That's not what we see, though, when it comes to the body positivity movement. And that's what makes it stand out. The body positivity movement that we're seeing is people coming together to raise the white flag on a problem that we need to be raising the red flag on. And one of the striking things that we outline throughout the book, I dedicate an entire chapter to, is on how we've created this nation of addicts, and so we have an addiction to food. And the research seemed pretty clear to me that sugar in particular is more addictive than cocaine. I talked to people and interviewed people for the book who said the research on that was pretty clear. And it also just makes sense broadly. I mean, we've essentially created a nation of heroin addicts shopping in grocery stores full of heroin everywhere because of how sophisticated these food companies have become. And engineering their products to be as addictive as possible. I mean, it's not just we taste food.
They tell you that. They tell you that you can't just have one, right? All
Right.
those things, and so they have scientists that are paid. I mean, this is not conspiracy theory anymore. This is like reality, trying to say, how do we make this more addictive? If you get people to be addicted to cigarettes or alcohol or whatever it is, then you have a customer for life.
Coca-Cola actually, in their offices, they don't refer to their customers as customers. They refer to them as users. They know exactly what they're doing. And when you use that terminology, I think it says so much about how Americans have kind of fallen into this trap. And Americans don't generally like being told Americans don't generally like being told it's their fault. And broadly, it's on one hand, it's not, but at the same time, it's still going to be our responsibility to fix it. And one of the things I get worried about when it comes to kind of the Make America Healthy Again movement is that I think Americans are seeing a lot of these reforms come out, and just days before the administration, you had Steak and Shake announced yesterday that they're going to start using beef tallow in products instead of seed oils, and you have red dye being banned by the FDA. I get worried that people are going to look at what's going on and say, Robert F. Kennedy is going to make me healthy, or whatever's happening in Washington is going to make me healthy. I'm still going to be able to live the way I want and continue to live this lifestyle that's just kind of built on an addiction. It seems like we're addicted to everything now, our screens, our food, our sugar. Nothing could be further from the truth. And Ozempic's not going to be the quick fix that everybody makes it out to be. And I just think there's an entire pillar of personal responsibility that is being taken away when people get kind of distracted on every single food dye or every single additive. Because I think at the end of the day, Americans just need to recognize that this is an addiction that we're battling. And if we're going to make any progress on this, we're going to have to fight that addiction using addiction strategies. And that's what I would tell the example of the 350,000 person that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and that's so important because it's common sense to most of us, right? If you go, okay, look, if you're struggling with alcohol abuse, no one says, you know what, you're an alcoholic, that's fine. Just drink, just keep doing your thing. That's fine. Oh, you're going to get liver failure and you'll die earlier than everyone else, and you might get a DUI and you might kill a whole family. But that's fine. Do your thing because we don't want to have judgment. And you go, wait a minute, like there has to be, and you have to understand this is an addiction. And by the same token, a lot of my patients will say, they're struggling with weight and diabetes, and they go to Thanksgiving or Christmas, and their family's like, oh, just have a piece of cake. Like, no one's saying, just have one drink. You're an alcoholic. Have one shot. Just have one beer. Like, because common sense wise, but I think it's such a hard thing because food addiction, like talking about processed food addiction, very controversial still. I mean, people who understand addiction are saying, well, clearly, like you're saying, we have more studies that show it's more addictive than cocaine, and no one's going to say cocaine's not addictive. And so, we get into that situation where if we just say we're going to love you for who you are, just keep doing what you're doing, and maybe it's not the time you can give up your Twinkies, but maybe say, instead of having it every day, can we do it once a week, or can we make these changes? Can we balance out with exercise? And for some people, they can't have one Twinkie because if they have one, they're going to have 10, and that's an individual basis with just loving food or just being sad or depressed. So, I mean, there's so much to this, and, we have if we could figure it all out, we'd really be able to help society.
Well, I think one of the things that we found with the GLP-1 agonists that are becoming so popular, the Ozempics and the Wegovy's, is that they're actually reducing cravings for different things that are addictive too, like like alcohol, cigarettes, sex. And I think that's such validation that we're dealing with a food addiction, a nationwide food addiction. And I was on NPR about a year and a half ago, and I was asking a question to these two doctors who were having a discussion about obesity. And I asked them, I said, don't you think we need to maintain a healthy stigma on things that we know that are bad for us? So for example, I don't think we should destigmatize an addiction to smoking, because we know smoking is bad for us. And one of the doctors was upset because she assumed that I was assuming that everybody who's fat and obese has food addiction. Okay, maybe not everybody, but obviously most people, and even people who are anorexic have some type of food addiction, because it's a compulsion. This is an obsession with food. I was talking to Dr. Joan Iflin about this, and that obsession with food. And so I think just about I don't think it is an exaggeration to say at least half the country is probably food addicted to some degree, especially when you have 40% of the nation categorically obese, 72% of the nation at minimum overweight. There's obviously issues with the body mass index standards that those numbers are based on. But I think on an individual basis, your doctor can also tell if you are overweight on the body mass index because you have too much muscle mass or a high body fat percentage.
Yeah, for sure. That's really, and we have, monitors now, DEXA scans or something I use called the Sika, where we can look at your body composition. So, a lot of people are using these drugs and they're losing 40 to 60% of their weight loss is muscle mass. Guess what? If you want to die young, get rid of your muscle mass. So we're going to see problems that are coming, I think it's kind of like the statin drugs. The doctor goes, "Oh, I just absolved myself of all responsibility. Here's a statin drug. Just do what you want to do." Or here's your insulin. You don't have to change. You eat more cookies, shoot more insulin. Well, it doesn't make it disappear, right? So we're not making people metabolically healthy, and we're not giving them longevity or better life extension, quality of life extension. So yeah, we have a lot of complex issues, and you did a good job of going through all the data, and also you went through, and I think it's important because it's what it is. You went through, and you could probably maybe from memory talk about some of them, but I'm seeing these influencers who are huge influencers dead at 32, 35, 42, and you go, wow. I don't think I want to follow someone who's dying at that young of an age or losing their ability to care for themselves.
There are no old influencers or body positivity. I don't mean to sound morbid and it's horrible, but there's none that I could find I couldn't find the age of every single influencer, but I didn't see a single influencer on promoting these messages who looked over 40 years old. And a lot of them that do go on these podcasts say, oh, well, my blood work's fine. Okay, you're 25. Come back when you're in your mid 30s, mid 40s, and still kind of living the lifestyle with no type of problem. I think one of the interesting things about Ozempic is that there's this bizarre pushback towards these GLP-1 agonists by these influencers for body positivity because they think it pushes the message that obesity is a problem to be fixed in the first place. And so it was kind of one of the most
there's a conflict there, which is really surprising, right? That's a surprising conflict that we have.
Right.
Yeah, and the other thing you raise, and maybe we could touch on that a little bit, is that you said a lot of these influencers were paid by big food.
Yeah, and one of the interesting ironies here is that even though there's certain influencers here and there, not all of them, of course, and actually some of them end up taking Ozempic, is that the Obesity Action Coalition is a nonprofit that is dedicated to destigmatizing obesity as the new norm in America. Their top sponsors are Novo Nordisk and some of these different pharmaceutical companies selling these different drugs. And so, of course, and now you have other organizations like the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. They've been partners with Dove Soap promoting the Campaign for Size Freedom, and Dove Soap is a subsidiary of Unilever, the largest manufacturer of ice cream in the United States. Obvious conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
And you have several influencers with massive followings on Instagram who have been promoted in Dove's campaigns. And so there's just massive conflicts of interest here.
Well, and I'm blanking on her name, and you'll know, Follow the Science. I don't know if you read that book, but she goes through a lot of the conflicts of interest and pushing certain movements, and you go, oh my gosh, who's behind this movement? How do all of a sudden we have so much invested in these different movements? You go, oh, this one's making a drug that treats it, and this one was, well, it treated basically you're on both sides of the coin. Someone gets sick, and then they have to have the medicines to fix them, but you made them sick with the medicine on this side, and then you have to use another one to make them healthier, right? So there's so much of that's out there, and you go, why are these movements rise up so quickly all of a sudden? You go, oh, who's funding that? And you look at the PR firms behind things, and you go, oh my gosh, like they're just using people as pawns. Like, because if you're saying hell, really, once to a degree, if we're eating cookies and donuts and drinking soda every day, sooner or later we're going to be dependent on pharma. Or you just die. Like there's no other way out if you're not going to change your lifestyle.
It's really exploiting the severe emotional turmoil that comes with being morbidly obese. And I do want to emphasize, I do want to validate that pain. I can't imagine what it's like to live 30 years just extremely overweight. The taunting from childhood carries with you the rest of your life. You struggle to fit an airplane. I mean, it sounds, so many of the things that they talk about do sound objectively miserable. And I just always want to empathize, but at the same time, there are things that we could be doing to fix that. This doesn't have to be, we're not victims of our fate. And these influencers have really found a way to capitalize on a lot of that emotional turmoil that's now being exploited by the food and pharmaceutical industries to promote this idea that you can take a pill for every ill. So continue to live however way you want, and we'll take care of you. Okay, but obese people pay at least 2 to 3 times the amount in healthcare dollars over their lifetime than people on otherwise healthy weight. But I was scrolling Instagram. Of course, the book came out in November, but I was on Instagram last week and I was coming across this influencer who has a petition to the FAA to mandate airlines create larger seats, because it's not the people getting bigger, it's the seats getting smaller. And she's got almost 40,000 people who have signed it as of last week. But I came across her profile and she launched this Operation Fat Liberation this week. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. What is Operation Fat Liberation? I went on her productions page and I found where her corporate sponsors included Walmart and McDonald's. So I emailed her, I wasn't sure if she would respond to me, but I asked her, okay, how much money are you making from McDonald's and Walmart as an influencer with almost 100,000 followers on Instagram? And she said she gets paid up to $10,000 per a post from some of these different companies. And so it's just, and the reach is not limited to just their own following on Instagram or Twitter or wherever. The Washington Post published a story in 2023 uncovering at least across TikTok and Instagram, they found food companies sponsoring influencers with a reach of at least 11 million combined followers. And so it's the reach is well beyond just a few influencers trying to normalize obesity as beautiful.
Well, and there just recently there was a big scandal with nutritionists who were paid by industry, right? They were taking tons of money and they're saying, "Oh, these foods are fine. Look, do everything in moderation. You could eat," and they specifically would name certain products, and they're getting paid to do that. So you go, "Gosh, you've totally compromised." I mean, for me, when I tweet, I just get people mad at me and stuff. I don't get paid for anything, but I'm doing something wrong. But it's these kind of things you look in and go, gosh darn, because it looks like it's grassroots, but it's not. Because you pay me $10,000, I'll say something nice about your product.
And it's exactly what the cigarette companies did throughout the 20th century. I mean, the exact same playbook. And it makes sense when you look at how Philip Morris and G.R. Reynolds, the largest cigarette manufacturers in the country, took over food corporations in the 1980s. And so,
and they made vending machines. They made the chips and crackers are in vending machines instead of cigarettes, right? And Joe Niflin does a great job of going through all that.
Exactly. And so you see they it's like the same scientists to manipulate our food supply after all they had learned about addiction with cigarettes, and they applied that to our food supply. And then now it's the second wave of big tobacco. Really, it is convincing a healthy population that these toxic products are not only healthy for them, but will make them beautiful. Right. So in the 20th century, we were all told, cigarettes are good for your teeth, and cigarettes make you skinny, and cigarettes make you healthy and happy. And we're just seeing the second wave of that play out with body politics.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the same. As a matter of fact, I spent time in Guatemala, El Salvador, doing volunteer work, and I see diabetics with their sugars 400 coming and drinking sodas. And so the soda companies have got there and they market it. They go, well, you need this for energy so that you can exercise. So we're gonna drink more soda, like Gatorade would do here. And you look and like the kids playing tennis, tennis for 20 minutes or soccer, and then all of a sudden they need 4 bottles of Gatorade, and you go, oh my gosh, like we're in trouble. Like we got to figure that out. And as you know, with the low carb ketogenic movement, there's studies coming out. Dr. Kutnick just released one saying you don't need to carb load if you're in a ketogenic state. You might if you're running 120 miles or something like that, but most of us who are weekend warriors, we don't need all that stuff.
Right. And I think there's so much, again, there's so much confusion when it comes to nutrition. And that confusion, I think, was done on purpose. And this is where I think the food and pharmaceutical industries are insidious, because yes, they feed the country, but also they fed us a lie for 70 years on how to feed ourselves. And so when you have a nation that's consumed by this low fat diet being told by trusted public health authorities to eat a low fat diet, follow a calories in, calories out model. Well, of course, everybody's going to wake up frustrated, and you're going to have these new wave of influencers promoting obesity is healthy because there's nothing else they feel they can do about it. But also, this goes to this narrative of conforming to the circumstances. I think my generation especially has grown up wanting the circumstances to conform to them, rather than understanding that we just need to conform to our circumstances and kind of climb ourselves out of these holes that we've fallen into.
Yeah, and like you're saying, this whole thing, like you're talking about making the seats bigger. Okay, you make the seats bigger on the airplanes, now fewer people can fly on each plane. So then the cost of everyone's travel goes up, right? Because they're not there to lose money. And so it's a hard thing. Plus, there's even things now they're saying like the weight of the passengers, that you could take less luggage because the plane can only take so much weight. So if everyone's morbidly obese on the plane, then you're going to be able to take less baggage, less on that journey. And so there's a lot of big, and I get it. It's like no one wants to be embarrassed or have to buy two seats or have to fly first class when they can't afford it, and they have to go to someone's funeral or something like that, you know. And so it's a tough situation, but I see it that there's such an entitlement where they're telling, you know, like all the hotels have to have, you know, a super strong bed so that they don't break the springs or, you know, things like that. I mean, it's a tough, because there's economic cost to other people also. It's not just because you make a decision, right?
And the FAA also about in 2021 had mandated airlines update weight guidelines because the nation's people are getting heavier and their luggage is getting bigger. And so the FAA is already requiring airlines to adapt to this problem.
Yeah, so that increases the cost for everyone, right? And using more gas, and you know, all these kind of things that you're alluding to. So there are definitely, it's not just a simple answer where you go, okay, let's just do that. That would be nice, just make all that, because all of us like to have bigger seats if we're comfortable, but you realize, okay, then we're not going to be able to to fly and go places we want to go to, you know, in a timely manner. So all these things are huge societal stuff, and plus, you know, the big issue is the cost of, you know, Medicare. Our public health is crumbling because of, you know, look at the cost of diabetic complications with bypass surgery, you know, wound care, amputations, blindness, dialysis, and you go,
the list goes on and on.
It's unsustainable. But I have, you know, as a matter of fact, you know, in my line of work doing direct primary care, I just had an 82-year-old lady come to me, and our first meeting, she looks at me because she pays like a monthly fee, right? $100 a month, right? Whatever. And she said, I hope I don't get my money's worth out of you. Right? She goes, I don't want to see you. I want to be healthy. And I'm like, you're my ideal patient. Are you kidding me? Like, you don't want to be here every week. Like, let's keep us healthy and have an incentive. And I think in healthcare, we've seen it's like, the reality is the sicker the patient is, the more the doctor gets paid because they can put more billing codes on there. Right. And we don't get incentivized to make people healthier in the standard model. And that's why a lot of doctors are stepping back saying, where's our incentives? Like, the sicker the patient gets, the more I get paid. That's not very good.
It just feels like this massive con, and people wonder why healthcare remains like the primary issue in every single presidential election every 4 years. It's because Americans are getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And really the only thing that we can do about it is embrace changes to our own lifestyles. And I love the idea of making our food supply healthier. I think we probably should re-examine the 3,000 substances on the generally recognized as safe list, which is like a privatized list at the FDA. But at the same time, the only people who can fix this problem is ourselves. And that's just an unpopular message. And I think that was one of the few things that Michelle Obama got right in her campaign. There were 1,000 things she did wrong. And I write about that in the book. But at the end of the day, what I think Mayhaw needs to do, and the Kennedy campaign needs to do at HHS is find some pillar so that Americans recognize Kennedy can only do so much. And yes, we can increase transparency at the federal level and make reforms to the food and pharmaceutical industries, but this is going to have to be a bottom up movement. And that's where I think actually Melania Trump can really come into play. I think you could have a two-pronged program. You could have Kennedy initiating regulatory reform at HHS, and then you could have Melania Trump accomplish what Michelle Obama failed to do. Because I think what Melania Trump has that Michelle Obama did not is this new renaissance in nutrition, and specifically metabolic psychiatry. You have people like Christopher Palmer and Georgia Edie coming out and reporting on these groundbreaking studies on the connection between nutrition and mental health. And it's not even that Melania Trump really has to do anything much differently. I mean, she's already talking about mental health in her Be Best initiative for children. She can just tack on nutrition to that. And she can really kind of be the key to this generational change that we're going to see with the new administration. But I just hope people understand nobody else can fix these problems for them. And not being where we are today should be all the motivation we need to get going to where we want to go tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think for all of us, anyone listening, we have a responsibility, because I had to change my whole thing. I was doing the ADA's recommended diet, gaining weight, pre-diabetic, feeling miserable, joints are hurting. I'm working out 6 days a week. I should be able to outrun this, and I'm not. And then Jason Fung comes around, talking about metabolic health, insulin resistance, diabetes, all these things. And you go, what am I doing? I go, if he's right, I'm going to be super mad, because I've been eating Melba toast and like rice crackers and like white rice, right? And that's been and smoothies in the morning, right? God, this is a disaster. You change what you're doing, you feel better. So I think you're right. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I know a lot of people are talking about legislation, like tax the heck out of the big food and raise the price on pharma stuff. And you go, wait a minute, how about if we don't have the demand, supply and demand? So the less demand. So if people aren't buying the terrible food because they're educated, then all of a sudden, guess what? You're going to have to make healthier food. It's not that these people are evil. They're trying to make money. So if they could say, hey, no one's buying these certain price. And the other thing is we have food deserts in the inner cities where the stores are not stocking meat, vegetables, and stuff that will they're like, people aren't buying that. They're just buying the processed foods. That's it. So but if they say, hey, look, I have patients, we'll educate them. Will you provide those foods? And they'll buy them from me. Sure. We don't know, but we're not going to let all of our vegetables sit there and go rotten because no one's buying them, in these inner cities. But there's liquor stores on every corner.
Right. And I don't generally think most Americans are lazy. I think, sure, there's going to be lazy people everywhere. But I think Americans, just looking how they dutifully embrace the low fat diet, I mean, Americans really followed that for a long time.
And we got sick doing that too.
And right? we got sick
doing it. Not say, hey, maybe we have to question this, that we're wrong. Maybe this food pyramid is upside down. Who funded the food pyramid, right? That we started looking at, the guys who are making those kind of foods are the ones who funded it. Oh, okay. Like you're saying, these conflict of interest are so inherent. So I'm hoping you're right. And I'm 55 now, so I'm more of a cynic now, because I'm hoping, I know the power lobbies that are there. So you're going to go up, and they're going to go up against big pharma and big food. That's a tough one. So you hope people don't compromise their values and say, okay, let's just do it here. We'll give you this bone, and you know what I mean? How these deals are made, instead of saying, look, let's do the right thing, and then maybe you need to change what you're doing if it's not working. And like you're saying, a grassroots up saying, hey, look, we're not going to do this. And I think the other thing is that we've sold out the inner city. We've sold out like for instance, Hispanic groups. I had a group that I worked with metabolic health, and in 16 weeks, we helped them reverse their diabetes and a lot of their health problems, just even anxiety, depression. We're seeing that. Just saying, look, let me educate you. Then you make your own decision. If you want to have 14 tortillas a day, okay, but here's the cost of that. Right. And then we can make an informed decision. And some people are going to say, forget it, I'll just take insulin and take 14 tortillas and orange juice for breakfast. Or you say, hey, I'd rather be healthier and feel better. And then all these women, 23 of them, started working out together, going for walks. It was a peer pressure to do fun stuff together and not focus on eating junk food all day while you're sitting there at your desk. Right. So it's pretty amazing what we can accomplish through education. Once people understood it, they were amazing, because they understood everything. They got it. They go, oh yeah, look, I had this one thing. Look what my sugars did. I'm not having that anymore. And they can make their own. They don't need me. They can make their own decisions based on seeing that.
I mean, just about every aspect of every person's life can be made better by better diet and exercise. I am absolutely convinced that is totally true. But Yeah, I mean, I think most Americans, if they're educated on what they should be doing, Americans will adapt. And I am optimistic that Americans are starting to get that message. You're seeing different independent media come out. This podcast, you have Andrew Huberman becoming going
Joe
viral.
Rogan, Joe Rogan's talking about it.
You
Tucker
have
Carlson. There's so many people out there saying, "Hey, look, we need to look at this."
And they've been unleashed now because just in the last week, you see Google's going to stop these censorship operation campaigns. Facebook's going to seize these censorship campaigns. At least they say they will. I mean, who knows if they're going to? It's an open question. They've made promises like this before, but now I think they kind of read the shift in culture after the November election. I think, and maybe they're just trying to make friends in the administration. Who knows? But I do think just watching how they've become unleashed already, Americans are getting the message that their public health authorities have been lying to them. I think COVID was a wake-up call that Americans are finally waking up on. It was so depressing to watch Americans just sleep on that for years and years and years. But I think 4 years after COVID, people are kind of becoming retrospective.
And I think they go, who has my best interest at heart? Like, let's look at, like, I think we should all disclose our conflict of interest, right? When if I have someone sponsor my podcast, we don't have anyone sponsoring this podcast, by the way. We said, look, we don't want even the pretense that we're biased on what we're saying. If we recommend something, it's because we like the product or we like your book. I don't get a kickback on your book. So it's one of those things where we say, okay, we have to disclose these conflict of interest, where you're getting money from, who's funding. Like you're saying, $10,000 a tweet or a post, that is unbelievable. And you see who's funding it, and they have a vested interest. But the person who's leading people astray, they don't know because they're just a pawn. That's why they call them a useful idiot, right? And so it's a big problem. And so anyways, it's just really interesting that you can go through, and that's why your book is so good, going through all these different dynamics that are at play and say, it's like, we have to look at this. And when people are saying, they're eating more of my product, but don't say anything bad about those people, and you go, okay, like this conflict of interest is so incredible. And and I don't know where I stand with a lot of these things, but it's the means have come out and they're talking about how the news is like, all the commercials around the news are either pharma or big food, and so that they're paying for that, right? They own that. Like, no one's going to say something bad about their sponsor. That would be stupid to do that, right? So if you're going to have a sponsor, you better have someone that you believe in and that you're not totally biased in how you're going to present your data or your podcast or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another one of the things that I think we probably should ban direct to consumer ads. I think they just confuse people. I think doctors get frustrated because consumers come to them, why can't you prescribe me X, Y, and Z? I think we're like, what, 1 in 2 countries, but there's probably a case to be made for them. I don't know. A better analysis for what I think Mayhaw should be doing is just promote education. And I don't think Kennedy can do everything. He's not Superman. He can do a lot, but I mean, this is just going to take
getting the right people and surrounding yourself with the right team who understands. And I know a lot of my friends have been called by Maha to talk about, hey, what are we doing in the nursing homes? What are we doing there? How do we make the standard of care better? And that's what we have to do. Is the standard of care is terrible right now, like everywhere. Our healthcare system's in shambles. Like the stuff I see, I can't even imagine it. People want a referral to psychiatry and they're like 5 months. 5 months, I'll be dead by then if I'm majorly depressed. To see a oncologist, a nephrologist. I mean, it's ridiculous. I've never seen anything in my career. I've been doing this for 20 some years now. And you go, man, I mean, just to, like, as a matter of fact, my mom was just ill. They sent her out of the hospital. She couldn't walk, and no home health referral, no nothing. And then they're like, oh, it's going to take 2 weeks to do a referral. Then we're going to I was like, what do you do? So, but you see that the system is totally in shambles, and, all we can do is make ourselves healthier and not be part of the system, hopefully, and keep us out of the hospitals and out of the doctor's offices as much as possible. And so what do you think, Tristan, like your main point you want people, like, what do you want people to walk away with after you're reading your books? What's your main points that you really want to hammer home?
Well, I want people to be health positive. I think positivity has a big role to play, but there is such thing as toxic positivity. And that is when you're so positive that you don't realize there's anything you'd be doing better. And so the big takeaway is probably part 2 is more important than part 1 in terms of having a how-to guide on how to kind of live a healthier and happier lifestyle. And recognize that a lot of the people presenting these messages of obesity is healthy, obesity is not a problem, are the same institutions that sold us the low fat diet, the calories in, calories out model for 70 decades, and then locked down the country until we took their vaccines to reopen. And those, I think, are the two biggest takeaways I want people to grapple with when they read it.
Have you gotten over being locked down yet?
I don't think I'm ever going to get over it. And I've talked to so many other people. It absolutely killed me. I became severely addicted to marijuana. I mean, that was my drug of choice. So that really gave me a respect for people grappling with addiction, food addiction. I smoked weed every day for like 3 years. It was ridiculous. I won't do it again. But it really did give me an appreciation for how strong addiction can take over your life and be so disruptive, and how difficult it is to get over it.
Yeah, it's good for you to have that insight too, to see how people are struggling with food, because you're a healthy looking guy and fit and everything. So you go, man, it's hard to identify. But when you go through something like that, and that's why, when we saw it, we stood back and said, okay, you're keeping Costco open, you're closing down the mom and pops. You can't go out to a healthy dinner, but you can go to the strip club, and you could go to the casino, but you couldn't go, right? You could go to Home Depot, but you couldn't. And you started looking at this, and I was shocked. I mean, during the whole lockdowns, because all of us stood back, and anyone who had common sense go, this doesn't make sense. We go, well, why would you close the gyms, but you can go to the strip club? It doesn't make sense. Like, the gym's going to make you healthier and more likely to survive. And not going outside, some of the seniors were locked in. They never saw another person for 6 months, and so the mental part of that, like what you're talking to, you're still struggling with. So we predicted it, that we would see a huge increase in spousal abuse, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, right? All these, and obesity. Like, people went back and said, oh, when I was a kid, I had my Lucky Charms every Saturday morning, and I was happy. So I'm going to eat that. And then you eat donuts and cake. And then all of a sudden, people, like, so many people gained 40 pounds during COVID. It's ridiculous, right? During the lockdown part of it. But at the same time, I'm looking at advertisements from El Salvador, of all places. And they're saying, go outside, go hike by yourself and exercise and do this and eat, drink water. I was like, El Salvador knew better than we did? Seriously? and you look at their mortality rate compared to ours, and they were saying, you need vitamin D, you need sunshine, you need all these things. You go, wow, you need social connection. And we're like, what happened with, how come the United States, no one said that in the United, none of the public health people said that. And they said, just lock yourself down and hide and wait there. And then, and wait towards pass, or like you said, to get your injection, then you could go have your life back. But if you don't do it, you can't have your life back.
Yeah. And I think the consequences of this are going to be with us for years to come. I mean, I think there was a misconception that when the lockdowns lifted, everything would be over. And that is so not the case for everybody I know, at least. Definitely not the case in my life. I mean, my isolation continued for years after lockdowns, quote unquote, ended. I had moved to Denver in July 2020. I didn't know anybody there. I thought I would meet people quickly. That wasn't the case. I ended up just after 3 years, like, okay, I need to do something big. And so I moved to a mountain and wrote this book. So I guess that's also how the book kind of came to fruition, is just kind of.
Yeah. So there's good that comes out of it. Like, you're locked down and you got to do these things, so
Right.
it gave you time to, like, say, I can't go do anything else. Let me do research. Let me study. Let me, even though at the time they were telling people, don't do your own research. That's dangerous. Like, what? Like, seriously?
And even
not
censoring
to think
that
for myself.
research.
And censoring the research. I'm telling you, the more that's coming out, the more it's so troubling and frustrating. So I'm glad for people like you who use that time, even though it's a devastating, it was a horrific time for you and for most of us. That something good comes out of it. Yeah, you could do research. You could, have something positive, because maybe you would be distracted doing other stuff if these things didn't happen. So that's one good thing. So I would tell everyone how they can get your book and where to find it.
Well, they can find it on Amazon. Just type in my name or type in Fat and Unhappy book. It should come up. Or it's also, the link is pinned to a tweet on my Twitter profile, and it's just Justice Tristan with an A.
Yeah, and then we're going to have links to it in the show notes for everyone to find it. But no matter what side you're on, I think it's worthwhile to read, because there's tons of, and it's not just opinion. There's tons of scientific data. And I was stunned when I even reached out to Tristan. I go, oh, man, I don't know how you got so many footnotes of studies that you looked at and people that you've contacted, and I guess that's what happens when you're a journalist and actually do journalism and look for to look at the whole situation. So
and living on a mountain for a year with nothing else to do.
Yeah, living on a mountain by yourself and just dealing with life. And yeah, I mean, I hope we all learned, but I'll tell you, say what you want, anyone out there listening, but my metabolically healthy patients, like in my practice, 0 hospitalizations, 0, no one died, no hospitalizations. And they were all focused on metabolic health and saying, hey, look, let's look at the best science we have out there right now. Whether it's politically correct or not, let's look at the best science and do what we can. I mean, our obligation, and I hope doctors listening will agree to this, is our obligations to the patient, not to social media or what the political powers at the time is. Our responsibility is to the patient in front of us, right? And to give them the best information we can. And what Tristan's talking about, this is why it resonates with us, is he's talking about metabolic health. He was talking about this before Kennedy and all these other guys were talking about it too, right? I mean, so it's so huge to talk about how do I put myself in how do I give myself the best chance of survival, right? To be active, exercising, watch your carbs, not hate the world, not drink too much, not smoke too much pot, unless you're writing a book. And no, I'm just kidding. So, all these things are so important. So there's a ton of wisdom here. And I think, it's a sensitive topic. And I was like, when you first said I'm like, woo, you're talking about that, huh? That's a sensitive topic but I think we're at a point now where people are realizing, look, we've been fed a bill of goods and a lot of stuff, and there's vested interest behind a lot of these movements. And just to be able to weather the storm and use common sense and see what we're seeing around us too, and how we're feeling. It's critical thinking and observation. So do you want to close this with something, Tristan, since Tro's not here?
Well, I would just say if, making America healthy again starts with making ourselves healthy again. And so what I hope this book will do is inspire people with some, almost as an instruction manual of how to do that. And that's what I hope people take away from the book.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for joining me. Sorry, Troy didn't make it. He texted me. He had a big emergency at his clinic. So good having you. And everyone, thanks for listening. And hopefully, share this book with your family members, friends. Read it yourself. I had an advanced copy and I really, really enjoyed it. And it was eye-opening, a lot of the stuff I read. And so I think it helps to look at the whole problem and really make your own assessment on it. So Tristan, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us on Patreon by going to lowcarbmd.com.